Funding for Texas Monthly Talks is provided in part by Public Strategies Incorporated, managing campaigns for corporations around the clock, around the world, and J.P. Morgan Chase, the state's largest financial institution, serving large and small businesses, governments, schools, churches, and individual Texans just like you for more than 135 years, and the MFI Foundation, improving the quality of life within our community, and the Matson McHale Foundation, in support of public television, and also by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, proud to be a founding partner of Texas Monthly Talks, and by the law firm and public policy practice of Vincent & Elkins, LLP, providing legislative, regulatory, and public finance counsel for complex business challenges. Vincent & Elkins, online at velaw.com. And viewers like you, thank you.
I'm Evan Smith, the editor of Texas Monthly. Until the very end, he loved her, and liked her, and respected her, for her charm and her intellect and her wit and her practical side. She made him a better writer and a better man. And she made him happy, as you could tell from every single word he wrote about her. And he wrote perhaps hundreds of thousands of words about her during their more than 35 years together, in magazines and between hardcovers, in poems and articles and whimsical book-length narratives. Fittingly, he saved the best for last. 5 years after his often immortalized wife Alice died of complications from cancer diagnosed a quarter century earlier, the extraordinarily talented, dryly witty, and companionable author Calvin Trillin somehow summoned the emotional fortitude to bid her farewell in a piece in The New Yorker that became an instant classic. Alice Off the Page, nominated for a National Magazine Award, quickly made the rounds as everyone's favorite thing published in ages. And now, less than a year later, it's resurfaced, expanded a bit as his 24th book. About Alice is, as the title implies, the story of the woman who became the center of 72-year-old Trillin's life when they met at a party thrown by Monocle magazine. He was a Kansas City native, a Yale graduate, a veteran of the Army, and, at the time, a reporter for Time magazine. She was a Port Chester, New York girl with degrees from Wellesley and Yale who taught school and wrote a fair game herself. From the moment in 1967 when he began his current gig, as a staff writer for The New Yorker, they were a literary couple with few peers, and she was a recurring character who became as well known to his readers as he did. How sad they must have been, as we all were, to see her go. But how wonderful to have this tribute, equal parts poignant and funny, to the woman Trillin clearly adored, and make no mistake, to the institution of marriage itself. A conversation with Calvin Trillin on this edition of Texas Monthly Talks. Essentially do a version of that truck line. This will be a fun night. Okay. Good work, I got the call. It's on the one. It's on PBS. Lewis. And then I stopped my show to get back to it, but it's okay. Please take your seat. All right, good. Calvin Trillin, hello.
Hi, Evan.
Welcome to Texas.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
I want to ask about Alice, obviously, and about the book. This is someone you wrote about for years. But I wonder if grief, which is often private, made it hard for you to write first the magazine article and then the additional material for the book, in this case.
It wasn't. It was sort of draining, but not really hard to write. Once I figured out that I was going to start each section with a quote from the previous kind of writing about Alice, which was sort of a sitcom character, or one-dimensional character. Somebody introduced us once, and we were both speaking at a conference of English teachers, and said, "They're like Burns and Allen, except she's George and he's Gracie." So that was her character, which was true. I mean, she was by far the most sensible grown-up in the house. There's no question about that. But it was a sort of a persona rather than a. And I thought if I started with each section with a little passage from that type of writing, that I could kind of correct it in the body of the work. So I thought at first it was sort of a device that allowed me to write it, but then I realized it was one of the reasons I was writing it.
Yeah. The difficulty, though, I imagine, in writing about somebody who was so much a part of your work is this is sort of the last Alice piece, right? Presumably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did that occur to you as you were writing this? Well, this is kind of the last time I'm going to be able to go here?
Not exactly, because I wasn't really planning to do that. You know, I wasn't planning to write it.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no idea I was going to write it, and then David Rebnick said, in a quite a tentative way, really, would you think about writing about Alice?
Oh, I'm sure it was tentative.
And you know, I might have written about it sooner or later. I wrote a book about my father in the 90s, and he died in 1967. So there's a kind of an imperative, writer's right. You know, so eventually I might
have come back around to it.
I might have come to it, but and I thought, well, I'll try it. And the first epigraph was from the first line of Alice, Let's Eat. I think that book began something like, now that it's fashionable to reveal intimate details of married life, I can say that my wife Alice has a weird predilection for limiting our family to 3 meals a day. That was about eating, and she played the character who reminded me that of what I weighed and whether I should really be eating, that sort of thing.
Well, in fact, another story in the current book is of perhaps that same function that you described earlier, where someone said, "Is Alice here?" and you introduced her, and there was some question of people thinking that she was a dietitian.
Well, that I was speaking in San Francisco, and someone said, "What does Alice think about her portrayal in your pieces?" And I said, "She thinks that it makes her sound like a dietitian in sensible shoes." And he said, "Is she here?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Could she stand?" And Alice stood up, and she looked smashing. But she always looked smashing. And she didn't say anything. She just reached down and took off one of her shoes, which to me looked like it cost about the amount that it would take to tide a family of 4 over for a year or two in some parts of the world, and waved it and sat down.
Everybody must have just loved that.
Yes,
of course.
You know, it's odd being married to a writer who might write about you. I mean, I never wrote anything about Alice or the girls that I thought could possibly be embarrassing or anything. And the fact that they were portrayed as sort of one-dimensional character was just a way of hiding them. I mean, writing about them, you could read everything I wrote about Alice and the girls before this book and not know anything about them.
Right, and this piece is very different in that aspect.
Not know what they did. You couldn't tell the girls apart, and but it was sort of a joke around the house. Sometimes, if the girls had gone upstairs or to do their homework or something, and Alice and I were at the dinner table and, you know, lingering and talking, married people talk about everything, sometimes Alice would say something and I would say, "I hope you don't think what you just said was off the record." Because then all this stuff is fair game.
Of course.
But in fact, I never wrote that sort of thing.
Did she get the power to veto anything that you wrote in advance?
She read everything I wrote, and sometimes I would even show her letters, and she would say, "You're not going to send that, are you?" Well,
we can all use one of those.
Felt that the person was insulting. Yes, I think I will.
But she did not ever say to you,
never
"Please
said,
take this out"?
No. I mean, in fact, I always thought that I had this tremendous disadvantage in writing memoir in the United States, where it's become sort of an atrocity arms race. You know, to if you can't show that your particularly your childhood, that there was, you know, at least incest and maybe bestiality or something. That
you're nobody, right?
Well, you know, I mean, you don't have a chance. I went to this conference in Key West, what I call the January Dip and Airfares Literary Conference, and the theme was memoir, and I said that, you know, I just thought it would be very embarrassing hanging out with a bunch of memoirists at a memoirist hangout bar or something, and they'd exchange these atrocity stories, these secrets that had come out in their books that just make your hair curl, and then they look at me, and I'd say, I mean, I could say this in Texas because it's not going to get back, but
Of course. Yeah. Right.
I wouldn't say this in New York.
No,
but I had a happy childhood, and I actually had a good time in high school, and so they would look at me. What's the secret? You know, the only secret I can think of, I actually wrote in a book once, was about my collie dog Chubby, which is really a true story. That we had a collie puppy when I don't know, my sister and I were 3 and 4, or 4 and 5, something like that, and then he was sickly, and one day he just disappeared, and we went to our parents and said, "Where's Chubby?" And they said, well, they'd given Chubby to some friends who had a farm, and that way Chubby could frolic in the barnyard in the sun with other animals and have a good time. I never thought much about it after that. And then Chubby's name came up when I was home. I think I was home from college. It was some years later. And I said, why didn't we ever visit Chubby on the farm? And my sister looked at me and said, there wasn't any farm, you dummy. Chubby had to be put away. And I said, Chubby's gone? and my mother, I think it was, said, well, probably be gone in any case because collies don't usually live
long time.
18 or 20 years.
Right.
Yeah. And I said, yeah, but why am I just finding out now? And my father said, it's not our fault you're slow on the uptake. And so I put that in a book, and then my sister called about a week later and said, the collie was not called Chubby. Collie was called George. She said, you were called Chubby. So it's sort of a rare thing for me. And then when I did a book called Family Man, I looked back at what I'd written about my family, and I realized that at a certain age, when the girls started to get to be sort of, after they were about 10, the last piece I wrote about that had either girl in it when they were about 10, and I didn't set a policy about it, but I just sort of naturally quit writing about them. Occasionally I would write something that had a kind of generic daughter in it, or one time I wrote about the tension that was caused among 16 or 17-year-olds by the approach of the vocabulary part of the SATs, where they started talking rather funny and used a lot of long words. Most of them didn't use long words. You know, actually most of them could get along for a long time just with the word like. As in, he was like what? He was like what? He said like, he was like okay. And then they got to, I think there I had a teenager called S, who was worried about the vocabulary tests, and I said I wouldn't worry about it. You know, some colleges don't count it much, and you can always go to work in the dime store, I guess. And say not worrying would be a Herculean task. That is a task very difficult to perform, because in my group there's no paucity of anxiety. In fact, there's a surfeit, an overabundance, a plethora. I mean, they were all talking like that. But I called the person S, and then I also had my daughter read it and said, "Would that embarrass you if I did that?" So it's a tricky thing writing about your family.
Oh, I believe it. Now, you mentioned your childhood in Kansas City,
right?
Which indeed was happy.
Well, what can I say?
What are you going to do? Right? Yeah. You still have very fond memories of Kansas City. Obviously, you think
it's a shrine.
Right. Well, explain that. Not just for the barbecue.
No, but the barbecue helps. But yeah, it's a wonderful place, and I like going back. And I used to say to Alice occasionally, we could go back to Kansas City, and I would buy you a house overlooking the brown waters of Lake Lotawana. And
how romantic.
Yeah, I don't think she went for that. She actually never even answered. So I guess she would have been opposed to that.
Yeah.
And she thought that I liked it in a sort of a romantic way, but would have found myself kind of itchy if I'd lived there.
At what point did you think you wanted to be a writer?
I think it was a sort of a system of elimination for me. I knew I wasn't going to be anything that required mathematical skill, for instance. I always was unable to convince my mathematics teachers that many of my answers were meant ironically. It was my worst subject.
Is that it?
Yeah, and I had a lot of problem with pi. Remember, you probably weren't here then when the Texas state legislature passed a resolution in favor of changing pi to an even 3. I was for that. So I knew.
Easy to remember.
Yeah, I wasn't going to do anything having to do with numbers or business or anything, and I thought about going to law school. My father had a very simple notion of what should become of me. My father had great aspirations for me and didn't go to college, grew up in St. Joe, Missouri in an immigrant family, and read a book called Stover at Yale when he was a boy and wanted me to go to Yale from the time I was born. He was a grocer and he put away this 2% rebate you got from one of the bread companies for, I don't know, displaying their bread in front or paying your bills or something, for me to go to Yale. And
which you did do.
Which I did, of course. What can I do?
Right.
And I always said that his aspiration for me was that I be president of the United States, and his fallback position was that I not become a ward of the county. And I think his view about what was going to happen changed constantly, whether I was going to be the president or a ward of the county.
Right.
And, you know, I think all parents, in a way, are like that, because you see your kid in so many different ways, in so many different situations, and sometimes you think, God, what a special human being. How did we have either the luck or the wisdom or something to create this person who could do anything in the world? And some other times you think, could that kid find his way home? I mean, so but my father, I think, panicked when I got out of Yale. He thought maybe I should be a lawyer and come back to Kansas City, become a lawyer. And it was a real, I said, you wanted me to be president, now you want me to be a lawyer in Kansas City? I don't understand. And I had a problem with law school is that I saw a movie, and I've never been able to find out which movie it was, but I think it was Clark Gable. He played this entrepreneur, sort of bowled his way in, and at one point he got through with this meeting and he snapped his briefcase shut and he said, I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. And I thought, the lawyer now has to go back and draw up papers? I don't want to do that.
Not very exciting.
No.
Right.
It's not my idea of fun. Sorry.
Right.
So I didn't do that. So I think most of the people. I did a profile of R.W. Apple Jr. of the New York Times a couple of years ago, and I said in it that one of the differences between him and most of the other people who went into journalism of my era was that, particularly from places like Princeton or Yale or something, where it was still considered sort of déclassé to, you still had the vision of the guy with a sort of rumpled suit and the copy paper folded up and the bottle in the drawer and one of those pencils that have black kind of ink or lead. One of the differences between Johnny and the rest of us is that he actually knew always that he wanted to be a newspaper reporter. Most of the people I know my age sort of backed into it, and that's true of me.
But you've been at the New Yorker, where I guess that is your principal place of...
It's sort of my headquarters.
Since 63.
63. I am so old, I've been there so long, that when people get irritated at the New Yorker, they write me. And
tough to be that guy.
Yeah, although some of them, I guess, write Roger Angel, who's been there longer than I have. And, in fact, when the first time the New Yorker had a picture of a bare-breasted actress, a photograph, a couple of people wrote me outraged that this sort of tasteful, understated magazine did this. And my defense was, well, they were small breasts. And so you could argue that the New Yorker's tradition of understatement was still... Continue, right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good answer, actually.
Right, yeah.
And so, there since '63. But I was also happy to be reminded at the Nation, on and off for a very long time, but consistently since '90. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, no, actually, before that, because I used to do a column for the Nation.
Right.
I did a column from about '78, I think. I get mixed up about this. I think '78 to '85. And what happened is that the editor of the Nation, who was somebody I'd known since Monocle, he had a magazine called Monocle, which is actually where Alice and I met at a Monocle party, which I reminded him Monocle was much more successful as a marriage brokerage than as a magazine.
Well, it also was where he met his...
Yeah. And a lot of people got married around it. It was very good for that.
This is
the
famous Victor Novaski.
Yeah, what we call the wily and parsimonious Victor S. Novaski, yes. And he asked me if I wanted to do a column. And at the time I was doing a series for the New Yorker, a piece somewhere every 3 weeks around the country, roughly a 2-week thing. And so I said I'd do one every 3 weeks. This was after I asked him what he was going to pay for each column, and he said, we've been paying something in the high 2 figures. And and then I said, I turned this, I said, what do you mean high 2 figures? He said, well, we've been paying about 65. I said, that sounds like the middle 2 figures to me. And so I turned it over to my high-powered literary agent. I said, play hardball. He got him up to 100. And so after I was there for a few weeks, he said, what about these quotes? And I said, what quotes? When he said, did John Foster Dulles really say, you can't fool all of the people all of the time, but you might as well give it your best shot? And I said, Victor, at these rates, you can't expect real quotes. For $100 a column? Come on. So, and then after a while, we syndicated the column. And then in '90, I started doing what we call deadline poetry for the Nation.
Which I notice, as of this very day, the new issue of the Nation is online, and you have a poem about the surge.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good word. It rhymes with
surge
a lot of
things. I welcome that word. I don't welcome some of the political candidates, to tell you the truth. I judge candidates pretty much on rhyme and meter. Ross Perot was one of my favorites. Sorry to see him go.
How about Obama?
Well, Obama might be okay, except I used up all the rhymes with Osama.
You and Roger Ailes.
Yokohama. Slap Your Mama.
Yes, I'll say your mama was out there, was hanging out there right now. Low-hanging fruit. Yeah.
And Clinton was a terrible disappointment to me. Clinton is the orange of American presidents.
Rhymes with nothing.
Rhymes with practically nothing. I get $100 a poem also, but I found that most poets get paid by the line, and the top pay is $10 a line. The New Yorker.
You're the best paid poet in the world, then.
If I write a 2-line poem, which I often do when I want to get that buzz you get from being at the absolute top dollar in your field. I wrote one, Lloyd Benson, who died recently, when he was confirmed as Secretary of Treasury. I wrote a poem called A History of Lloyd Benson's Dealings with Special Interest Groups. And it was, the man is known for quo pro quidness. In Texas, that's how folks do business. That's $50.
Is that right? $50?
Yeah, $50 a line.
That's pretty good.
And actually, the first book of verse on the Bush administration, Obliviously on His Sales, was half of a poem I wrote after George Bush's college transcript was revealed to no apparent effect on the campaign, which was Obliviously on he sails, with marks not quite as good as quails.
That's very good.
Okay.
Well, we're going to need to end it there on a very funny poem, which I think is a good place to end. Well, good luck with the book and everything else, and please keep writing poetry and come back to Texas again soon.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Calvin Trillin. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Funding for Texas Monthly Talks is provided in part by Public Strategies Incorporated, managing campaigns for corporations around the clock, around the world, and J.P. Morgan Chase, the state's largest financial institution, serving large and small businesses, governments, schools, churches, and individual Texans just like you for more than 135 years, and the MFI Foundation, improving the quality of life within our community, and the Matson McHale Foundation, in support of public television, and also by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, proud to be a founding partner of Texas Monthly Talks, and by the law firm and public policy practice of Vincent & Elkins, LLP, providing legislative, regulatory, and public finance counsel for complex business challenges. Vincent & Elkins, online at velaw.com. And viewers like you, thank you.